colleague who's going to be helping me out on the slides. And then for those of you who haven't attended these webinars before, you'll notice that there's like a Q&A box next to you. So if you have any questions going through the webinar, make sure you type those in the Q&A box. And then at the end of the hour, we're going to be joined by Alan Lithgow, who's the team lead for the chronic fatigue service at the Royal Free. So he's going to join us at the end. So as I said, my name's Natalie. I'm training to be a health psychologist at the moment, which means I work clinically with people suffering from fatigue, but I don't personally experience it myself. So I'm really grateful to be joined by Anna today, who's going to also offer some of her lived experience as we go through this webinar, which is really, really useful. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Natalie. My name is Anna Tunaru. I'm a senior peer recovery tutor at the Recovery College, and I am going to share some of my lived experience with fatigue. Obviously, I experienced fatigue as a result of living with fibromyalgia. So although the webinar will talk about fatigue in general, I won't be able to give experience of post-COVID fatigue, but there are some similarities, and then some of the experience and some of the tools that I'm going to share might be helpful for people living with post-COVID fatigue as well. I also have a background in psychology and health psychology, and I work for many years with people struggling with mental health. And at the moment, I offer courses on personal recovery and well-being at the Recovery College, Camden in Islington. Next slide, please. Yes, so as I mentioned, today we are going to talk about fatigue, how to manage fatigue in general, and really touching a little bit about post-COVID fatigue. But as Natalie mentioned, we are going to be joined by a clinician for the Q&A, so it's your chance to ask a more specific question about post-COVID fatigue. So very briefly, what we are going to cover today, what is fatigue, and have a list of what research shows that are symptoms associated with post-COVID fatigue. And then moving on to explore how to manage fatigue. And as I said, there might be overlap between tools that work for both types of fatigue. So spoon theory, pacing, self-compassion, and other strategy will be mainly explored in today's webinar. So we'll be here for an hour and then having Q&A for the last half an hour from 1:30 to 2 o'clock. There will be a few resources at the end of the webinar. There are about 4 slides with resources related to post-COVID fatigue and chronic fatigue in general. So as this is a fatigue webinar, my invitation is to all of you to look after yourself during this time. So please make sure you sit comfortably, you have some drink at hand, and you can pause at any time. So this webinar will be recorded. So please do look after yourself as best as you can, and don't push through any tension or any fatigue, screen fatigue, which is very common these days. Next slide, Anne. So what is fatigue? There are many definitions of fatigue, but we just selected 2 of them. So in general, it's about feeling of physical and mental tiredness, and it can be very different from feeling sleepy or experience a lack of motivation. So I talk about I mentioned actually my fatigue coming from a syndrome from a fibromyalgia syndrome, which is a chronic condition. But fatigue, it's a very common symptom for many other conditions, including chronic fatigue syndrome and post-viral fatigue, which is part of this post-viral fatigue, which is part of the subject we are going to talk today. So the post-viral fatigue, it's when we have an extended period of feeling unwell after a viral infection. So I can tell you from how I got the fibromyalgia syndrome. I remember for sure that it came about 15 years ago after a serious flu event, but obviously there are many other causes associated with my condition. So I can't give you more details about how post-viral fatigue manifests. I'm not a clinician, and I didn't work with people with I don't work with people with fatigue, but research shows that it's completely different from normal tiredness, and it's a general feeling of being unwell. So that's kind of in a nutshell what is fatigue, and then how this can be linked with post-viral fatigue. Next slide. So some of the symptoms associated with the fatigue as a result of COVID. So fatigue can come as a result of activity, physical and mental activity. Can come with muscle and joint pain, with what is called brain fog, problems with memory, concentration, planning, decision making. The brain fog is also a symptom that I am very aware of because it's part of my condition. So research also shows that people with post-COVID fatigue that may have issues in remaining upright or feeling dizzy, so remaining upright for a longer period of time, and also feeling unrefreshed after sleep. And finally, a symptom exacerbation. So this may vary from person to person. That might be one of them or more of them. So it's something that I will leave to you. Probably you know much better if you live with this post-COVID fatigue, and it's not very well understood how this post-COVID fatigue is caused. Our colleague Alan will be able to give you more specific responses in relation to causes and fatigue symptoms. Thank you. Next slide, Anne. So this is actually where I come with my expertise, I would say, as I live with this fibromyalgia syndrome. And fatigue is one of the main symptoms alongside pain and brain fog and many other symptoms that I'm not going to mention here. So I'll give you a little bit of overview of how does it feel to live and manage fatigue. Next slide. Thank you, Anne. So because I've been living with this condition for many years, I managed to get a way of living with it, to living well. So I would like to share with you how it feels during bad days, so when I have a relapse. So some of the symptoms are present on daily basis, that but very low intensity. However, when I have these bad days, these are symptoms that I need to be aware and I need to deal with. So tiredness that may come with no warnings. It could be at the beginning of the day, middle of the day, or late in the day. And a general feeling of being mentally, emotionally, and physically drained. So literally very little energy. So I may need to rest or to sleep more than usual. For sure, this is a day when I don't want to make any plans for the week or to make decision. because I know that I won't be in the right frame of mind. And this reduced energy and feeling unwell comes with some difficult emotions and unhelpful thoughts in terms of feeling guilty, feeling anxious, especially because I have to cancel last minute maybe work or meeting with family or friends or any other plans that I may have made in advance. So there are a lot of stuff that I need to deal with. But now, because I've been through this experience for such a long time, I'm aware what to expect and to have a realistic expectation on what I am able to do during that particular day. Next slide, please. So this is an image that speaks to me in the ways that I think I can describe my energy, and it's about my thinking of my energy as full batteries, emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. So I'm aware that I may be depleted physically, maybe fully, but I may have some mental energy available, or I may have some emotional energy available. So what I need to make sure is that I'm not depleted at all levels in one go. Although there is an overlap between these 4 dimensions or 4 batteries, I want to make sure that I have some tools or some activities in place that can give me some relief, some kind of uplift to be able to manage my day, especially when I have bad days. And on the next slide, you'll see how I kind of work with these 4 batteries. Next slide, Anne, please. Yes. So I think here it's a way of looking at these batteries. Either they are recharging or they are depleting. So on the bottom, you can see ways that I can recharge my batteries, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual batteries. I haven't put on the top how I deplete them, because I think it's quite obvious that they can get depleted with demanding task, work, family, and so on. So we're going to talk later about, and you are very, very familiar, I suppose, with how we can get depleted. So what I do for my physical energy, there are various things that I came to learn and to explore throughout the years. So what I do on daily, on a weekly basis, is to use mindfulness. You'll see some of the activities that are common for all 4 batteries, because if, for example, I tap into awareness of my breath and body, or if I tap into some relaxation exercise, that will give me probably both mental and emotional energy. Or if I do something that has purpose for my life and brings me joy, like being in nature, that will kind of recharge the other batteries at the same time. So for the physical one, you can see there, I use, for example, gentle yoga, stretching, rest, listening to my body. But more important for me is just to be aware what helps me, and to stick with that. For the mental one, you'll see mindfulness again, having alarms when I need to take rest, maybe keeping activity diaries, identifying triggers for fatigue and for stress as well, and reaching out for support. for the emotional energy, being aware of my emotions. So that's all along the mindfulness practice and then the self-compassion practice, with a lot of exercises, breathing exercise, awareness of the body, awareness of the thoughts, gratitude, something that I'm really grateful in a day, even if it's like, you know, going outside for 5 minutes, having a cup of tea, something that I'm grateful for. Relaxation, everyone has different ways to relax their body and their mind, so it's important to find what works for you. And more than anything, having realistic expectation, especially if I have a bad day, what is realistic to do on that particular day. And finally, for the what I call spiritual battery, my spiritual battery, things that give me purpose. What are my values? Am I living by my values or I don't? And for example, here for me, nature and gardening, it's something that brings me joy and brings me energy, maybe not so much physical energy, but emotional energy and mental energy. So just in a nutshell, how I manage my fatigue with different practices for mind, body, and heart. Next slide, please. So with all this in place, I would say that this is my self-management toolbox, and making sure that I tap into these practices when I need, and being aware what's available. I have more good days than bad days and relapses. And if I look back 10 years ago, I remember myself being extremely unwell, working very little and being hopeless and helpless. After I kind of found the right way to manage my fatigue, I managed to have a richer and healthier life. I work 4 days a week. I managed to do a master's. I've done my other courses and so on. So I'm in a much better place with this self-management in place. And it's about relying on myself, having a sense of agency, as well as taking into account what's available in terms of treatments, as I take also some medication. Next slide, please. So now we are going to explore some specific tools that Natalie is going to introduce and explore together. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Anne. It's always really useful to hear it from other people, and say particularly hearing about what other people have gone through. And also for me, it's really useful to have someone who can say that what I'm talking about can work. And hopefully we're going to be able to show that as we're going through, that Anne is going to be able to back up some of the things that I'm saying from her own experience, which is really useful. Can we have the next slide, please, Anne? Right. So before we get started, I actually wanted to introduce you to someone called Christine Miserandino. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She is an American who lives with lupus, and she has been really active in the invisible conditions community. She runs an online website called butyoudon'tlooksick.com, which is full of articles about people living with invisible conditions, about how they talk to, how they deal with them, how they manage them, how they communicate with their healthcare teams. And that's really useful to be aware of. Sorry, I've got a call on my Teams, I apologise. But one of the quotes that she has that's really useful is the idea that the difference between being sick and being healthy is having to make choices or to consciously think about things that the rest of the world doesn't have to. I think that's a really important place for us to be starting with. So when we're dealing with something like fatigue that isn't visible, we can't visibly see that there is something wrong. It can be really hard to communicate that with people that we love, and that can mean that we're dealing with an awful lot of extra pressure, trying to maintain this facade that we're doing okay, and that's something to be really wary of. Next slide, please, Anne. So I thought we'd have a quick look at why fatigue is so difficult to manage and why we end up in this feeling so deflated with it. So this is a fatigue cycle that I drew up yesterday, but it's focusing particularly on the negative feelings that we have with fatigue. So the idea that if we wake up in the morning and we're feeling quite fatigued, we have to start making those decisions that healthy people don't have to make. We have to start thinking about, do I have enough energy to manage today? Am I going to be able to get everything done? And sometimes the answer is no, I don't have enough energy. I'm going to need to make some different decisions. So we start cancelling what we call negotiable plans. So these are the plans with like friends, plans that are maybe fun, but maybe plans that we don't need to do. And so we start cancelling those to save our energy. So we then go through our day with doing only the bare essentials of what we have to do. But that has a knock-on effect because we're not receiving any of the positive reinforcement that we get from our fun activities. We're not getting to spend time with our family, we're not getting to spend time with our friends, we're not getting to do things that we enjoy. Which mean, and on top of all of that, we're feeling really guilty because, you know, as Anne was saying, sometimes you have to cancel things last minute. And sometimes you feel guilt about that and you feel like you should be managing better. So we then end up with not only a lack of positive activities in our schedules and things to look forward to, but we're also ending up feeling overworked, stressed and guilty because we're not managing well enough and we feel like we should be doing better. So we end up with a very negative self-talk going, well, I'm not good enough. Why am I not being able to handle this better? We then realise that we're not doing anything that actually matters to us. And that means that we start feeling very powerless, really frustrated and really angry. Because no matter how hard I'm working, no matter how hard I'm trying to do everything, I can't do it. And what's the point? Where am I going with this? And then we start having those thoughts and those feelings. We end up, our sleep and our mood deteriorate because we're feeling stressed, we're feeling tired, we're feeling guilty, and we end up, that has a knock-on impact on our sleep. And so we wake up the next morning and we're still feeling fatigued and we go through that cycle again. And over time, we end up in this really, really difficult to manage spiral where we're feeling more and more stressed and anxious, which in turn is making us feel more and more fatigued. So hopefully today we're going to look at some techniques about how to stop that cycle and what things that we can do when we notice that we're falling into that. So next slide, please, Anne. So as I mentioned earlier, fatigue is invisible, and that means that it's really hard for people who don't experience it to understand. And I know when I'm working with people who suffer from fatigue, one of the first things I have to ask is, okay, what does your fatigue look like? How do we need to talk about this in a way that we can both understand it? So one of the techniques that I introduce some people to, and I want to introduce you to, is something called spoon theory. Next slide, please, Anne. So as I mentioned, spoon theory was designed by Christina Sarandino. It's called spoon theory because she was in a restaurant at the time and spoons were what she had to hand. So the idea of spoon theory is that you have a limited amount of energy or a limited amount of spoons to get you through the day. So if you are healthy, the idea is that you go to bed and your spoons recharge and you can usually wake up with a relatively normal amount of spoons and you know what you need to do. If you're living with something like fatigue or another long-term health condition, sometimes the spoons don't recharge. And sometimes the first thing you need to do in the morning is wake up and go, how many spoons do I have today? How much energy do I have? And you have to start doing that complex maths of how do I make sure I've got enough energy to do everything before you've even got out of bed, which is exhausting. The other thing is, as we mentioned, because they don't recharge reliably, you can't make plans for the future. So you can't guarantee that you're going to wake up on Tuesday and have different levels and have the right level of spoons to get through that day, because you can't guarantee that. You always have to be conscious of how many spoons you have. And again, if you're going through life constantly calculating how many spoons you have, that's exhausting, which has another knock-on impact on trying to manage day to day. Other things like getting sick will impact your spoons, not being able to go to sleep on time. All of these things will reduce the number of spoons that you have available. And you can't forget about it. You can't just go, sod it, today I don't need to worry about my spoons. It's always going to be a part of you, and it's always going to be this mental load that you have to hold on to. Now, there is a link on the slides, I don't know if you can see, from medicalert.co.uk, and that is actually a game that encourages people without a long-term condition to go through a spoon theory game, so they can understand the kind of choices that you have to make that they don't even think about. So if you are trying to talk to someone about this, I recommend you have a look at it and you send that game to them. It gives them a chance to have a go. But the idea of spoon theory is that we make those energy levels visible. So if we're imagining that we're a superhero and we're fighting an enemy, if the enemy is invisible, we can't make a plan, we can't make a strategy about how to deal with them. But by giving them a number, giving them a name, giving them a value, we can start recording where our energy is and we can start making that visible. And that's what we're going to look into today. Next slide, please, Anne. So when we are doing certain tasks, we need to start keeping a track of what tasks we are doing during our day, so keeping a track of where we are, but also how much energy is that task costing us. So there are two types of energy that you need to be really aware of for working with fatigue. So the first one is how much physical energy is something costing you, and that's fairly easy to standardise. There are lots of physio scales about how much something is costing you physically, which I've given you an example here, but the other one that we need to be aware of is how much mental energy something is costing you, and unfortunately that varies person to person and is really difficult to manage. So this is something that you're going to need to go away and work on yourself. But for me, there are a couple of things that I know are really difficult to deal with. So I am quite severely dyslexic. So I know if I have to read an academic journal, particularly one that's photocopied and doesn't work with my software, I know that's going to be like a 7 or an 8 for mental exhaustion. I know if I have to read something on a computer screen in my office, which isn't a very good computer screen, I know it's going to go up to a 9 or a 10. So if I know I need to do these things, I know I can start calculating how much mental energy that's going to take so I can make a plan for that. On the other hand, alongside the NHS, I also work for a rock climbing wall, and once a week I will go to the rock climbing wall and I'll talk to people about rock climbing, and I'll make coffee and I'll chat and I'll just do general customer service. For me, that's really light, that's really easy, and it's like a 0 or a 2. It's something that I enjoy doing. But I know many of you who've worked in customer service, that's not always the case, and sometimes customer service is exhausting. So work out where you are and how certain things impact you, so we can be aware of what's going on. So Anne, have you got any other examples of mental energy that you wanted to share?
If we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so here I have 2 images, and the one on the right with the batteries, I think it's kind of my way to visualize my mental energy. And for example, if I need to have a conversation about health issues in my family, or I have to make a decision, long-term decision with my partner, then I need to look how much mental energy I'm going to invest in that conversation. And this gives me a way of kind of finding the balance of where I am. It's different from physical energy, because working in the garden, which is a hobby that I developed recently, it's completely different. So I may have very little mental energy, I may have physical energy, or the other way around. But at the same time, I would like to introduce the mood or feelings thermometer, because it's something emotion is energy in motion. So we may not be aware that emotion takes quite amount of energy from our day. And if I am probably quite wound up by various communications or things going on in my life, I may go up to the red zone, where I tend probably to react rather than respond. So kind of not having enough time to pause and to recollect myself, because the mental energy probably it's not enough there. So I just react with whatever comes to me, which is not something that I'd really like to do often. So it may happen from time to time, but I need to make sure that I'm in a position when I can pause. I can pause to choose my response rather than to react. And I think mindfulness helps me a great deal on this one. Next slide, please. So here I have an example of how I can track my energy and my mood. So and I use these 2 images that helps me with visualizing. So on the first column, you can see the times, and the second column, activities, and then my mood at the end of activity and how much energy I used. The numbers are explained on the right-hand side. So you can see the activities, they takes me quite a lot of energy, like having a conversation about difficult problem at work, for example, takes me quite a bit of energy. And then in terms of mood, I can get 2, so really good if the problem is resolved, or I may get to 9 if the problem is not resolved. And that is an indicator that I need to pause, I need to have some rest, and being able to recollect myself and then to respond from a more mindful, more calming space. On the other side, if you look at the mindfulness and the yoga, which is part of my recovery, part of managing my fatigue, then I use a bit of energy, which is 3, but the mood at the end, it's quite positive. So I'm in a good, calm, grounded, safe space. So knowing how much energy I use and which kind of mood I'm at the end of it helps me to unfold these unhelpful patterns and know how to plan my day and how to integrate activities that are more difficult, and then activities that bring me a sense of energy. When I talk about my batteries and my 4 aspects of energy, I think that this activity diary helps me to be aware of what kind of activities I need to put in to recharge maybe my physical or my mental energy, and then be able to respond rather than react. So it's a way of really helping me to plan, prioritize, and pace, which are the 3 P's that I mentioned under the mind battery in the previous slide when I talk about my experience. Thank you, Anne. Next slide. Oh, that's Natalie.
So, thank you. So again, I can just imagine your faces as we're saying, like, you need to start adding in extra work to what we're doing, and we need to start doing extra activities day to day when we've got so much fatigue going on. So this is me putting my money where my mouth is, quite literally. So this is some work I did with a patient fairly recently, who was experiencing fatigue after a shock illness. And what they were struggling with most was they were coming from a very high-flying job. I was reading through some of the questions earlier, and I know someone was in a very similar situation. They used to work very long hours. They used to being full of energy and being able to manage things, and suddenly being in this fatigue state meant that they were really struggling with it. So this is some of the graphs. This is one of the graphs that we worked on as we were going through. So as you can see, what we did was we started just tracking what was going on. And so I wanted to prove why this is really, really helpful to do. So as you can see, for her mood scale, she did a 3-point scale. So she did 100% for I'm having a really great day. She did 50% for meh, and she did 0 for I'm having a really, really terrible day. And then the blue line is how much battery she had left at the end of the day. So as you can see, when she was right at the start, when she was doing far too much with her day, her moods were very, very low. Whereas as we were moving through our work together, we noticed that when her energy levels dropped, they would be followed by a really low period of low mood. Whereas when she was being able to keep her energies at about the 80%, she was having much more like positive days, which is something that was really useful for us to work with. So being able to bring those energy levels into line and being able to see the patterns made were really helpful for her, and she was able to make some activities and make some changes to her schedule that meant she could go through this. So although I fully appreciate it seems like a lot of work at the start, it's very, very beneficial. Once we have those numbers, once those energy levels are visible, we can really start working with them, and it can do really positive things to our schedules. And next slide, please, Anne. So if we're looking at our energy levels, we're kind of treating them like a budget, if we will. So I stole this pie chart of an example of a budget, and the first thing I have to say is this person clearly doesn't live in London. The idea of only spending 30% of our paycheck on housing is absurd, but the idea is fairly similar. If we're treating our energy levels as a monthly budget, there are certain things that we need to spend our energy on, and whether that's in the day or in the month, if we can work out where those big cost items are, we can then make plans to budget for it. In the same way that if we were saying we wanted to go on holiday in 3 months' time, we know that we would need to start setting aside some money early. In the same way, if we know we've got a big thing coming up in a few days' time, we need to start saving the energy for it. If we know we've got a busy afternoon, we need to start taking time off in the morning to make sure we are prepared. So that's what we're having a look at. So if we start looking at our energy levels as a budget and being able to see where they are, what we're doing and where they're going, we can start making some smart decisions with it. Next slide, please, Anne. So that's my first challenge to you. I want you to start having a look at your schedule and having a look at the things that you have to do day to day. And I want you to make a note for yourself. What are your big spoons? What are the things that require you to have a lot of energy or a lot of commitment from your end? If you're struggling, there are usually two types of these. So they're either activities that are non-negotiable. So these are things like work or caring for children. Unfortunately, neither of those stop just because we're feeling ill. But the other type of activities are things that cost a lot of energy to achieve. So if that is delivering a big speech or preparing a lot of material for certain courses, they take a lot of energy. So if you can see them coming, we can start making plans in our schedule to accommodate them. So next slide, please, Anne. And on that note, I'm going to hand you back over to Anna because, again, what do I know? So I'm going to hand you over to Anna so she can talk it through how that looks for her life.
Thank you, Natalie. I was talking this morning when I met Natalie that, this morning I felt when I woke up like I had 10 spoons of energy, but by 11:30 I realized I have only 5 left. So I already used 5 because I had many things to do in the morning. It took me quite a great deal of energy. So Natalie was asking me then, so how you are going to deal with the rest of the day? And I said, look, I'm going to, so I have 5 spoons that I'm going to use probably by the end of the day, but there is nothing left for me preparing dinner, and make sure that I'm quite up for maybe a chat with my partner. So that's where the delegation and the planning comes in. So already had to communicate this to my partner and ask him to prepare the dinner. And he knows that I'm not going to be available in the evening because I plan to do some mindfulness practices and self-compassion. However, during the day today, I plan to have some rest. So after finishing this webinar, doing some breathing, having probably 5-10 minutes of fresh air. So trying to have these mini practices, the pockets of activities that it takes me a bit of energy, but gives me more maybe mental and emotional energy to be able to use by the end of the day. Next slide, please. Oh, that's Natalie.
Yeah, so over to me again. So as you can imagine, when I talk about spoon theory and budgeting and pacing with patients, one of the first questions everyone asks is, what happens when we run out of spoons? So in the same way, if you think of your body as a car and you think of petrol as your energy levels, in the same way that you can drive your car until your car runs out of petrol, but it's going to do some serious damage to the engine. You're going to end up crashing on a motorway when you run out of fuel. You're going to end up, your car insurance is going to go up because you keep having these crashes. You're going to have to keep being rescued by the AA and various things. So over the long period of time, we're going to end up in a point where we're not being able to look after our body. So we can drive until the car is empty. We can crash and we can go home to bed and we cannot speak to anybody. That is an option. Or we can borrow spoons from tomorrow's allowance, which is something that people do quite a lot. And we notice that when we're going through, I've got a slide where I talk a little bit about that in a moment, about borrowing spoons and the impact that can have. But we need to be aware that the long-term impact of running the engine dry or spending all of our spoons has on us. We're all aware of the metaphor, burning the candle at both ends. We know if we are using too much energy and we are not saving our energy for tomorrow or for the long period of time, what we're telling our body is that we can't cope. We are telling our body that we are not able to deal with everything that we're doing. And so our body sends us signals like pain, like fatigue, like confusion to tell us, slow down. You need to take care of yourself. So we need to start saving those spoons, saving that energy to reassure the body that we are okay. Next slide, please, Anne. So what happens when we keep borrowing spoons? What happens when we keep trying to overdo it? So I know it's been a whole year since lockdown, so this is an odd question to ask, but I want you to think back before the lockdown. So think back to this time last year. And I want you to imagine that you're in the office on a Friday and you're planning to go home, and then you realise that so-and-so from the office is leaving and you've been invited out for their leaving drinks. So you feel like you have to go. So you go out for the night, you stay out a little bit later than you planned, but you think it's okay, I'll borrow spoons. You go home later than planned, you go to bed quite late, you've had some alcohol. You wake up on Saturday morning and your children need to go to football practice. So you have to get up, you have to feed your children, you have to take them to football, you have to stand in a cold field for an hour while you watch them play football. You then realise that one of them's got a birthday party this afternoon, because children seem to constantly have social lives that you have to facilitate. And not only do you have to take them to the birthday party, you have to buy a present for the birthday party and help with the catering. So now Saturday's become a borrow spoons as well day. Now, if this had happened to you, I just want you to take a moment and just think, how ill would you feel on Sunday? We crash. We come home and we just have a Sunday where we just lie in front of the TV. And that's okay. But over time, if we keep treating our body in this way, the energy that we have available for us on a good day starts reducing. And instead of just needing Sunday to recover, we might need Sunday, Monday and Tuesday to recover. And even when we reach recovered, we're not the same level that we were, because we're not getting our energy back in the same way. And this is what's happening with fatigue. We are what we call boom and busting. Over time, we have less and less of energy available on our good days, and our good days get spread further and further apart. So we end up in this really vicious cycle that could be difficult to get out of, that we spoke about a few times. Next slide, please, Anne. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with this cycle that we find ourselves in? So there are a couple of things that we can do that we have talked about a little bit. So Anne has mentioned earlier that she can recharge some of her spoons during the day, so she takes some time to do some breathing. That can be really useful for her. I work with patients who go to bed slightly earlier, can set an alarm for later if they know that they're going to need a little bit more sleep. I know someone that finds sitting on a sofa and reading a good book for half an hour is enough to give them an extra boost during the day. Some people find listening to an audiobook or sitting with a cup of tea in the sun can be really useful. Everyone is slightly different, and being aware of what gives you energy can be a really good secret weapon, so you can be aware of what's going on and when you need it. But we also need to be really careful about what we spend our energy on. So in the same way with Tim talking about budgeting, if on the first day of our budget we decide to go and buy a new car, by the end of the month we're going to struggle paying our bills. And it's the same thing with our energy. We need to make sure that we are budgeting and spending slowly and spending on things that we need to spend it on. So that's where pacing comes in. Next slide, please, Anne. So with pacing, what we are doing is we are looking at where the energy is going and we're putting limits on it. So the idea, if you think back to the first graph that we had where the line was going up and down, this time we're putting barriers in, we're limiting how high a good day and how low a bad day is. So we're making sure that we are staying within that line. So when I'm working with patients, it can vary depending on how much energy they have, but we tend to say somewhere between 50 and 70% of your energy is where you're spending your life. Now, that's obviously raised some immediate questions, and I can just picture your faces going, but I've got so much stuff I need to do. So the really important thing with pacing is that it is very difficult to get started with, because there is this frustration and this guilt that comes with limiting our energy. And that is something that we are very aware of. But we also need to think about the positive impacts long term, which is what we're going to have a look at. So in the short term, if we can limit our energy and we can what we do is we say, think of yourself on a really bad day. That is what you're going to limit your energy to. You're going to treat yourself as if you're having a bad day every day. Now, when I ask you to think about yourself on a bad day, I also want you to talk to your loved ones and find out what you actually look like on a bad day, because sometimes we are not aware of that. And if you're struggling to think of where your limits are on a bad day, I highly recommend talking to someone that loves you, because they may have a better idea about it. So find out where you are on a bad day. What can you do without a break on a bad day? Then take 10 minutes off, and that's what you're going to do for that day. So we're going to work, we're going to have regular breaks, we're going to make sure that we're not overexerting ourselves, and we're going to schedule in breaks long before our body needs them. We're going to keep putting in these recharging points to make sure that we are maintaining that energy level, so we're not overworking it at any point. Now, when I was talking about this with Anna, she was giving me some examples of times that she's used pacing. So I'm going to hand back over to Anna now, so she can talk you through how that actually looks.
Okay, next slide, please, Anne. Yes, so how pacing can help me. So it's something that I've been doing for a while. Sometimes I kind of fail with the pacing, and most of the times it really helps me to increase the sense of agency and being in charge. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. One, when both of them are kind of learning from experience. One of them, it's about doing house chores, especially, cleaning. And I realized throughout the times that if I just make my mind to do the 2 rooms or 1 room in one go without having scheduled breaks, that would let me at the end really tired, but also having a bad feeling that I am not able to do other activities for the day. So breaking up the activities in manageable chunks and having this rest time, but also thinking about how much energy does it take me, maybe hoovering, maybe dusting and mopping. The amount of energy for hoovering for me, it's like more than for dusting. So I need to schedule this part of the activity in the beginning when I feel more rested, and then do the others later on. So, and this is what I mean by prioritizing. Also, what I can do today and what can be left for tomorrow. So with this approach, I managed to have a good feeling at the end of the day. Maybe I managed to clean 1 room or maybe just the kitchen, and have a day rest and do the next room tomorrow, or even to break it down in different tasks for the same room. And this is a good example of pacing. When I rest to listen to some music and maybe go outside, have some fresh air, or do some breathing exercise. But a bad example of pacing, which has happened to me a couple of weeks ago, when the time I was not aware of the time. I didn't plan to schedule breaks because I was so much enthusiastic about planting this edge row. And it took me about 2 hours until I realized that actually I'm extremely tired. I didn't have any break. I was feeling thirsty and hungry, and pacing was not there whatsoever. So this is the example of, being human and allowing to have days and moments when you are not, perfect, when you are not doing all the things that people tell you to do, because that's part of life. And what is really important in this case is just, what, okay, I've done it. I fell with this pacing today, but that's okay. I'm not going to do this on most of the days. So being kind and accepting and being compassionate with not being able to do these things at all times. So how pacing helps. I think I already mentioned the sense of being in control and having a sense of agency, that I can plan my day and I have some control over it, which gives me some motivation to do other things. In this way, I am able to achieve more than probably have some goals, and have a sense that I managed to achieve maybe most of them for the day, because I plan for them. So planning, prioritizing, and pacing, they're kind of all coming together for me, to give me this sense of being in charge, being hopeful that it's possible on certain days, but it's not possible all the times. As I said, there are days when I have a relapse, or maybe I would spend half of the day in bed and just doing very little, like breathing exercises, maybe guided meditation, and that's all. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I already introduced this concept of being your best friend, and this is something that I learned. So it's a skill that can be learned. And I would ask you, what would you say? What do you do for a loved one, for a friend that is in a similar situation? What tone of voice would you use when you talk to them? And do the same for yourself. I know that many of us are very at ease with offering acts of kindness and compassion to other people, really being caring, but it's more difficult when we want to do this to ourselves. And that it's a long discussion why this is might be. But as I said, this is something that we can all tap into, to things that we do for other people, do for ourselves, and accept things as they are at the moment, and take that sense of compassion, of caring, a warmth and friendliness to yourself. One practice that's really helpful for me is to use my hand and put it on my heart, and maybe do a self massage and say, may I be at ease, may I accept myself as I am, may I feel free of pain and suffering, and accepting that common humanity, that I'm not the only one in this situation. There are many more practices. We have a course at the Recovery College called Nurturing Self-Compassion, so I really recommend you to tap into these resources that can be life-changing when you bring acceptance, kindness, and friendliness to yourself. Next slide, please. Over to Natalie.
Sorry, I put myself on mute there. The last thing that we wanted to talk about today was the idea of balance. So we've already talked about the fact that we have to make different choices when we're dealing with fatigue. And there are certain activities that we have to commit our energy to, and certain activities that we cancel when we think we don't have enough energy going forward. So we wanted to just talk a little bit about the four-legged chair, which is something. So I hope I'm not bringing back any bad memories, but if we think back to homeschooling over the last year, I can imagine there may have been several Lego kits that came out over the last year that you've worked through with children. So imagine you've got a Lego kit in front of you. I want you to think of your routine and necessary tasks, so things that you have to do to keep your world spinning. I want you to pick a colour for these Lego bricks. So anything like cleaning, work, anything that you have to do is non-optional. They're one colour. I want you to pick a colour for your pleasurable activities. So these are things that you do because you enjoy doing them. They don't have to have a positive impact that you can see. So it can be watching a film, reading a book, listening to some music that you like. These are pleasurable activities. So pick a colour for those. I want you to pick a colour for achievement and mastery tasks. So these are slightly harder to explain, but the idea is that they are tasks that are difficult to do and require a lot of energy, require a lot of mental energy to achieve. But when you manage them, you get a really positive sense of achievement from it. So some people get this from work, some people get it from DIY projects, some people find it from crafts. The idea that you have to put in some energy, but you get a lot more out of it once you've managed it. So they're a separate colour. And then the fourth colour I want you to think about is closeness to others. So we are humans, we are designed to be social creatures. So the lockdown has showed us how much we rely on social interaction and talking to people and spending those time in social connections. So they're going to be a fourth colour for you. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to think of your day you had yesterday. And if you were going to assign every task that you did to one of those colours and build them into a little tower, take that and do that in your mind for a moment for me. Now, if we build our 4 towers, and we find that we've got one tower is much higher than the other, so we often find that people do a lot more routine and necessary tasks. If we're going to try and balance a book on those 4 towers, if it's wonky, the book falls off. What we want to try and do is try and make sure these 4 towers are roughly the same height. I'm trying to do my hands on the webcam, it doesn't quite work, but you can kind of see where I'm coming from. So in the same way that if we just do pleasurable activities and we don't go to work, we don't do any of the cleaning, our lives are again going to fall off. The idea that we need the balance of these 4, and if we are already tracking our activity levels, we're already tracking what we're doing, to add this extra step of, okay, what colour is this? What group does this fall under? And what does my balance look like can be really useful. I know for me personally, when I'm noticing that I'm feeling quite stressed and overworked, it's because I've forgotten about the pleasurable tasks. I've forgotten about spending time with people that I love, because I'm focusing on the routine and the necessary and trying to get stuff done for deadlines. So being aware of where that sense of balance is for you can be really useful in gaining that sense of mastery that we were talking about and getting that autonomy back. Next slide, please, Anna. So just to sum up, really, what we've been focusing on today is the idea that when we are feeling fatigued, we often have to make choices that other people don't. And we then end up making choices that we think are the right decision at the time. So we do cancel things that we think we can cancel, and we focus on things that we can't. But over time, that has a really negative impact on our mood, which again makes our fatigue worse. So what we're trying to do today is highlight the fact that we need that balance. We need the positive things that we're doing for our mood to help us recover from our fatigue. We need to prioritise time and energy for those activities that are really nurturing us as well. So whatever we're doing, and obviously if you're recovering from long COVID, there's going to be a lot of physical implications to this. And so working really closely with your medical teams, working with your physiotherapists about what can you do and what is safe for you to be doing as you're moving forward. But making sure you are prioritising time and energy in your budget to make sure that you can do a range of activities. And again, being able to check what we're doing and being able to record that, and being able to review it and say, okay, do I need to slow down? Do I need to pause? Do I need to continue, or do I need to make changes? So one of my favourite quotes when working with people is that you don't get a choice in how you react to something, but you do get a choice in how you respond. So when we end up in these situations where we are faced with so many tasks that we're trying to do, some of the things that we try and do to deal with that is we react and we back off. And that means that we end up with a lot of other implications that we maybe didn't see coming. So being able to give ourselves that space to make those decisions and say, okay, am I making this as a one-off decision? Do I need to change my routine here? Do I need to make changes more long-term to help me deal with this? And giving us that space to explore that is really, really important. Next slide, please, Anne. Okay, and now over to Anna.
Thank you, Natalie. So with fatigue, what else can we do? I think here it's a kind of a summary of what we already talked, and probably some keywords in terms of reminders. First of all, recognize that fatigue is real, and I remember it took me quite a while to accept this for myself and change the way I was living my life, in terms of lifestyle, but also in terms of my work and my relationship. So that sense of acceptance. And for post-COVID fatigue, I don't know, that might be something that will ease off after a while. You may not need to make this adjustment for the whole life, as is my case. We talk about big energy commitments like work, childcare, and so on. So making sure that you are aware of how much energy you use and how you are planning your day, and using this 3P space, plan, and prioritize to take pauses, to rest, and to have like moments on, busy types of activities, and then slowing down, and make sure that you track your energy and your mood, and then see whether there is a way to identify triggers, because with the tracking of activities and mood, we may be able to identify what triggers our fatigue or our pain. At least for myself, that was the case. So I was able to identify the triggers for my fatigue. For example, sleep, it's the biggest one. Then stress, it's another one. and the stress can come from different aspects of life. So it might not be very obvious, but if you take some time to do this tracking, you may be able to identify after a while, so there will be some patterns coming up. So we talk about pausing to rest and recharge your batteries, and that might be physical one, mental one, emotional one, and lots of activities out there. Practice relaxation. What do you find relaxing? Many people find, different people find different activities relaxing. So for me, for example, it's nature, it's being with friends, it's breathing, it's yoga, but that might not be the case for everyone. So just pay attention. How do you feel after the activity? And is that relaxing? Is that calming? Is that grounding? We talk about keeping an activity diary to track these unhelpful patterns, and then maybe track the triggers, identify the triggers. Looking at your lifestyles in terms of having a balanced diet, a good quality sleep. And I know these are very big subjects, and there are entire courses that talk about sleep and the diet. We have at the Recovery College courses on both of them. So just keep that in mind, that some adjustment might be necessary. Keep well hydrated. I have my bottle of water always with me, and I kind of measure how many I drink a day. So that's quite important to keep ourselves hydrated and reach out for help and support, friends, family, health professionals, to delegate, to ask for advice, and then to help you with anything that might be helpful. Next slide. So we have some resources that could be quite useful. So for post-COVID fatigue, is this your COVID recovery platform? It's an NHS resource. On the platform, there is a lot of information, advice on how to manage post-COVID syndrome, including fatigue. But also there is a program, online program, that you can be referred by your health professional, by your GP, or the any clinician that you are under care in terms of managing your fatigue. So that's available. There is a long COVID support group on Facebook. So people with post-COVID syndrome that share their experiences, that you may want to check it. Then plenty of guides and leaflets on the same topic, including the one from British Association for Chronic Fatigue Syndrome, another one from Royal College of Occupational Therapists, a self-care forum with information about how to boost your mood. And there is another slide with the cover of the leaflets from, next slide, please. So the first one, it's a nice long COVID guideline. Then we have the second one in the middle from Association of Chronic Fatigue Syndrome, and I put the cover of the self-care forum, Boosting Your Mood Tips. So there's quite a lot of information out there, but please keep in mind that whatever you read and then you come across to, it's general. So it's important to make sure that you explore it and keep what is useful and discard what is not useful. So having that person-centered approach, and I know for myself that many things that I heard that are quite good for some people, like strenuous physical activity, it's something that we don't talk about, we don't recommend, especially for post-COVID fatigue. But I know for my general fatigue that it's something that it just didn't stick with me. For me, gentle stretching and gentle activity, something that is more helpful than any kind of running or other vigorous exercise. So on that note, yeah, please be aware of what's helpful and listen to your body.
Okay,
Next
so
slide.
just finally, we wanted to have a quick look at some more general resources for fatigue. So I don't know whereabouts you're joining us from, but in Camden we have a series, we have a service called Books on Prescription. And so what you can access this book, Overcoming Chronic Fatigue, for free from any library in Camden without even needing to register for the library. It's also available on Amazon if it's something you're interested in. But please be aware that this is chronic fatigue, not COVID-related fatigue, and they are slightly different, which again, we're going to be joined by Alan in a minute to talk about those differences. As Anna mentioned, there are several recovery college courses about being kind to yourself and those nurturing activities for you to be aware of. And I also work for iCope, which is an IAP service, and we've got some pre-recorded workshops on things like assertiveness, so talking to loved ones about our needs, and also perfectionism. If we're finding that we're struggling with pacing because we're feeling like we should be doing more, then maybe some perfectionism work might be useful for you if that's something that you're interested in exploring a little bit further. Next slide, please, Anne. And then finally, I've just got some extra resources about spoon theory. So there's the website that I spoke to you about earlier, the butyoudon'tlook.sick.com. I highly recommend going to have a look at it there. There's the link to the game that I spoke about giving to loved ones earlier. And I've also given you a lived experience blog because, again, me talking about it has a limited impact, and hearing it from people that actually use it is far more useful, I think. And then we've also got some resources for pacing as well if you want to have a look into that in more detail. But as I say, please do that in line with your physiotherapy and your medical teams, and make sure you're not doing anything that they are not aware of, because it's their job to keep you safe as well. Next slide, please, Anne. So all that's left to say is thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you've been listening to our voices for an hour now, but we're now going to be joined by Anna Lithgow, who is the team lead at the Chronic Fatigue Service at the Royal Free Hospital, and we're going to go through some of your questions and answers, and hopefully we'll be able to answer anything that's been left out from the talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Anna, for your presentation. So I understand there's a question around predicting fatigue and how we can do that.
Speak up, speak up.
Do you all hear me okay?
Not quite. Is there any way you can turn your mic up?
If you can bear my face, I can just get close to it. Does that?
That works.
Okay, for you, having a close-up of me. Okay. So I was asked a question around predicting fatigue and how we deal with that when we can't necessarily find an identifiable factor. So there's a few points that come to light there. It can be helpful to understand what has made our fatigue worse in terms of learning for the future, but it's not the be all and end all. And sometimes it might be processes that are outside of our control anyway. So we know in post-viral fatigue, for instance, that sometimes the virus triggers the immune system to overwork, even though we're clear of the infection for a period of time, and that can make us feel fatigued. It may be that our digestive system has become affected, and again, there's not much volitional control we have over that. So if we can identify a reason, all well and good. There will be times where we can't, but what's really important in those moments is how do we deal with the fatigue now? Okay, so do we ruminate over it? Do we wonder what's going wrong now? What am I out of control of? Or can we move over time to a position where we say, okay, my fatigue isn't great at the moment. I'd rather it was better, but hey, this is the way it is. And I'm just going to do some skillful strategies to look after myself now, like the pacing, self-compassion and mindfulness that Natalie and Anna have already kindly taught us about. So I hope that answers the question around predictability of fatigue. And I say key point is you won't always know why, okay? And then I think there was a question asking for a pacing strategy that I could outline for you. Is that correct? Yeah, okay. So if you've got a spare piece of paper to hand and a pen, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll just give you a moment to get some. And this technique is called the traffic light system of pacing, and it's designed to be as straightforward as possible. I'll never forget the lady who once referred to a lot of the formal pacing strategies as illness admin. So this is meant to be easy. So what you do is you take a piece of paper and you divide it into 3 columns. And at the top of the left-hand column, you write red. The middle column, amber. The right-hand column, green. Red, amber, green, traffic light. Under red, I'd like you to write increased fatigue, increased pain, and increased stress. Skip the amber column for now, and then go to the green column, and under green, write relaxing, energizing, pain reducing. Then go back to amber, and underneath amber, you write no difference. So over the course of the next week, when you remember, forgive yourself if you forget, whenever you do something, try and attribute that something to one of these colours. Okay, so let's say, for example, I load and unload the washing machine, I think, oh, that aggravated my back pain, PS, I hate doing the washing. Unload and loading the washing machine goes in red. Let's say I go for a nice warm bath, I feel relaxed, I feel energized afterwards, the warm bath goes in green. And let's say I'm doing the washing up and I think, well, I don't feel better, I don't feel worse, it just was what it was. So that goes in amber. So over a week, don't make too many changes, just see where you're spending your time. Have you got one column which is perhaps bigger than the other 2? But let's take you guys out of it for a moment, and let's imagine that I did this for me. And at the end of the week, I said, right, all the green in my life, I'm not going to do anymore. I'm going to spend all my days doing painful, stressful, tiring stuff. Yeah, I'd probably become unwell. So it's perhaps unrealistic to expect someone who's currently poorly to recover if they continue to do the same. Biologically, what's happening, when we're in the red column, we're doing things which fill our bodies and our brain full of chemicals which make them feel unpleasant. Okay, we might even be stimulating inflammation. And when we're in the green column, we're producing chemicals which make our mind and our body feel like good places to be, and we trigger healing. Yeah. So at the end of those few days, make yourself a beverage of your choice, sit at the table and say, right, where am I spending my time? Have I got one column bigger than the others? And if the answer is yes, that's when you need to think creatively about how you can make some changes. It might involve the help of other people, and that in itself might involve changing your beliefs about what it is you need to be doing on any and every day. Now, you can do red, but it has to at least be matched by green. We're not suggesting for one moment you lie on a beach and go, hey man, that's it, I'm done. Nothing stressful for me ever again. You can do red activities, but you have to match it with green. Okay? Hope that all makes sense. Yeah. But I'll never forget one lady, and I'll share her experience with you all because I think it was such an insightful one. She came back and she said, it's helped a lot, but I've worked out something you didn't know. I said, great, what's that? She said, I could do green to recover from red. If I did green before red, red wasn't necessarily red. It could be amber. Clever lady. She worked out that if she filled up her fuel tank first, she didn't so easily go into the red. Okay, so experiment with it, make it yours. It will be individual. I've only got to look at my household for that. So in my house, bathing is definitely a green activity for my wife. I hate baths. I see them as lying in your own dirt. So I have a shower. Shower is in my green, bath is in my red. So experiment and tailor it to you. Have there been any questions that have popped up about any of this so far? Are there any questions I need to be aware of, Iris, that I can't see?
Yeah, there was one further question about how to start a conversation with GPs around fatigue, which has been experienced for years and years.
I lost you then.
The question is how to start a conversation.
I lost you, Iris. Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Yes. How to start a conversation with GPs after having experienced
I can't hear you, I'm afraid. Let me see if I can find this in the message box.
Alan, can you hear me? No.
Doesn't look like. Or maybe I can take a question until he finds it, until Alan finds it. I can take.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Anna,
Yeah?
if you take the one about being compassionate.
Yeah. Okay. So there is a question about being present that may feel very overwhelming, and I can resonate with that, especially if the fatigue comes on pre-existing challenges and problems. So because we need to be aware that this pandemic period may have kind of have the likelihood to bring about a lot of difficult emotions, difficult memories, and maybe events from our life. So the trauma or past trauma might come to the front stage during this time, which is quite normal, take into account the times that we are living in. So having fatigue on top of this, it's obviously even more challenging. So being present to the body could be overwhelming, absolutely. So what I would recommend in this situation, taking the attention to the environment. And one way to take attention to the environment, to bring yourself into the present moment and come from the dissociated states, come back from dissociated states, which is a way of surviving, of managing it's happening for you. It's to pay attention to sound. So it's called 5 senses exercise. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things you can smell, or 1 thing you can taste. So bringing this awareness into the environment can bring us into the present moment and help us to come back from the dissociated state. When we are outside, the walking, looking at the trees, being aware of the many and small details of nature, of the sky, of the bird, and so on, again, can bring us back and can be quite helpful and nurturing. I think might be even the green activities as Alan talked about earlier. So I would recommend, if you want to try awareness of the body and the mind, to ground yourself with this activities, and also breathing. Breathing can be quite powerful and quite helpful. Could be just watching your breath, or maybe taking slow deep breath through the nose and exhaling through pursed lips, and maybe a few breaths, 4 or 5, and see how you feel. And if you want to try mindfulness, there are drop-in classes, and I would recommend to have a mindfulness teacher to work with, maybe in a one-to-one basis or in a group setting. So avoiding to do this by yourself, as some exercises can trigger trauma memories. So I hope that I answer your question. And at the end, just to add this kindness and compassion to yourself as much as you can, maybe in very small doses, like giving yourself a hug or massaging your body, or talking to yourself in a kind of caring and warmth way, having loving kind affirmation, loving kindness affirmation that I mentioned before, like, may I accept myself as I am, may I give myself what I need. Yes, some exploration available.
Okay. I can see your questions. So what I'll do is I'll go through them as best I can. So there's a question here from someone who's had COVID fatigue for 11 months, and despite pacing, sleep, diet, etc., their symptoms aren't improving. They're trying very hard, and they've got additional symptoms of pins and needles and numbness, brain fog and stomach problems. The question is, what more can I do, and can I take anything for the paresthesia? So when you say you're trying very hard, this might sound strange, but sometimes with fatigue we're trying too hard, because we are perhaps fighting it, which is essentially using a stress response to try and overcome a stress-related problem. So that would be my first question. Are you sure you're not trying too hard? The second thing, in terms of what more can I do, it sounds like you're doing a lot of the right things, maybe trying too hard, but you're doing a lot of the right things, and time. I see self-compassion isn't in the list of practices. That could be something that's useful to add. And with regards to the pins and needles and numbness, I would suggest that you talk to the doctor in the first instance, just to make sure there isn't often a benign medical reason for it. For instance, a thyroid problem or a vitamin deficiency. And in terms of taking medication for paresthesia, this is where I have to hold my hand up and say, I'm not a doctor or a prescriber, so you would need to talk to a doctor or a prescriber about that. I hope that helps you. There's another person who's posted that if I do a green activity, say talk to a friend, but then it triggers red afterwards, do we reduce talking? Okay, I'm going to pick numbers for easy maths here. Let's say I've been on the phone to my best friend Betty for half an hour, and whilst I've enjoyed the phone call, I perhaps feel pretty wiped out afterwards. Yeah, the answer might be to cut that time in half as a starting point, and see how you feel. You feel fine? Okay, add a little bit longer on the phone next time. Yeah, I love going for walks, but if I walked for too long without a break, that might wipe me out. Yeah, so we need to balance sometimes even those things that we do find enjoyable. How do we balance fatigue management with avoiding physical conditioning? That's a really good question, and that's really where you need the help of a therapist working with you, because you're absolutely right. If we're inactive, we will get stiff, we will get weak, and potentially the secondary complications of that. So we want to try and stay active, but within what's called our energy envelope. So not running on empty, basically. We want to save some energy for tomorrow, and as long as we do that, over time we should see that our energy levels gradually begin to increase. And then the next question, somebody has a history of chronic fatigue, subsequently have had COVID, and now they're getting acute bouts of worsening fatigue. Yeah, that is something we are familiar with in this service. You're not on your own there. If we have a fatigue condition and then we catch a virus which can worsen fatigue, it can make us feel like we've gone backwards a little bit. But rest assured that all those techniques that you will have been using to address your chronic fatigue, those skills that hopefully you would have practiced and become quite skilled at, are exactly the right kind of skills to be using here too. And if you're still struggling, then your GP may want to refer you to a specialist fatigue service. Where are we? I'm just reading some more questions. Okay, so somebody has developed some fear of worsening emotions and thoughts, particularly around leaving the home. Can you help me to understand what I'm doing to myself? My illness is due to work stress. I'm afraid of making myself more ill, taking time off work. Okay, I mean, workplace stress could potentially be a contributing factor if that's something that is particularly important to you. And that's where maybe, depending on the kind of organisation you work with, talking to the GP, talking to any mental health teams that you may already be affiliated with, or your GP can help put you in touch with some mental health teams, but also talking to occupational health and maybe having a workplace stress risk assessment to make sure that you're being well looked after in the workplace. They would all be reasonable things I would suggest to ask for.
Maybe the big one. Somebody's asking.
Sorry, I didn't hear you then, Anna.
There is a question on the ambush fatigue from somebody.
Okay, I'm scrolling down. I think we did address that. That came from the person who had chronic fatigue and then had COVID subsequently as well. And I think that would be, especially if it's not managed well at the moment, have a chat with your GP about potentially being referred to a chronic fatigue service to help you. It looks as though we've done the questions that I can see. I'll wait to see if there are any more that come through. I'll try my best to answer them for you.
Can I just jump in as well to say that at the moment, most IAP services are also adapting their offering to make sure we are covering lots of the impacts of COVID. So if you are looking for particular support around depression or anxiety or low mood related to your COVID, then your local IAP service might be able to help you as well. So it's worth talking to your GP or maybe even getting self-referring yourself to those services. They are available for you.
I'm not seeing any more questions appear in the chat box. So,
Alan, this is Anne. The person who posted the question about chronic fatigue said they never had a history of chronic fatigue pre-COVID. So yes, the chronic fatigue is only, and the sudden onset acute fatigue is only since the COVID diagnosis and the background fatigue as well.
Okay, I beg your pardon. Yeah, so if this is a new onset of fatigue post-COVID that you haven't had an explanation for in the first instance, the first port of call will be to talk to the doctor to make sure that it is a chronic fatigue presentation rather than, say, a new onset thyroid issue, for instance, or a vitamin D deficiency. We don't want to fall into the trap of assuming just because I've had COVID, my fatigue is definitely going to be related to that. It may very well be, probably will be, but part of diagnosing chronic fatigue and post-viral fatigue is exclusion of other medical causes. So first port of call, definitely talk to the GP. And I can't see any more questions. I hope that's been helpful and that you've had to put up with a close-up of my face. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions.
I think we can end the session now. Thank you very much for all of our 3 speakers for making themselves available. That was really, really useful. Anna, Natalie and Ellen, thanks again. And for all people who want to see the recording again afterwards, just press on the link again. Once we've uploaded the video, you will be able to get to it. And who wants the slides, please send us an email to recovery.college@candi.nhs.uk. Take good care for yourself, and hopefully we see you perhaps next week or at one of the webinars on offer later on. Bye for now.